inogolo nyomani otaido poko te poko lidi achiu gole kedo wore kuk daneri jare ko bediye wan te poko loboni apot bon wo moro awi tong dan tiye har si kanda tiye jaga teker dan tiye wan te poko loboni bon ko paro.
They agreed to demarcate the land among its rightful owners. The grueling fight for her inheritance is now over. She has secured the resources to provide for herself and her children.
Atwara dwoko poch bod Yuganet. Piena mana warra puru porro. Kadi dungi no ballo jamina. Nugi utiu kwala me wo ballo jamina. Utimu donga ballo kuo. Etu nutiu luoro chik. Anado Yuganet konya do angeo chik. Gindu kwalo ballo jamina kwala. Ballo uton dogola kwalo jamina moti to kwala. Pea mahodani.
At age 17, Gloria Kembabazi would have been too young to stand up for herself in a land dispute. But she and her younger siblings recently won a court case with Yuganet's representation to recover their late father's land, which had been fraudulently sold to a neighbor.
Yuganet bakatwakira je kandi mazima batwereko ubushagishiki bija baturwanira baturabyo muko bija bayitoga umushija bamubuza yayendagano zeye okuyaba kozirewe na mawitwe keze kuzihayo yayemera batawe mwene ngere yibakubasa kubutereza umushija ajachi yayanga niko tukagumizamo mukoti tukahoza abayiganete bakatworereza byona bakabitarabyamo tukahika kusingura ikibanje.
More clients are getting to know about Yuganet through public education messages.
We have had our programs on radio. We have got outreaches where we go and teach people about their rights, their property rights, and how they should, look after their families and settle them before, things of the sort come in.
Sometimes what starts as a land dispute escalates and takes on other forms of human rights abuse. That was the case with Gloria Chakwera in Tungamo district, who became a victim of relentless domestic violence until she almost lost her life.
Anteze inkoni zabeze zorukwemanyireze zuba kwata tagicuruka antera konga obona ngo akanayenda kutera umutwe ati umutwe no kureta stane zo butagenda ati nagira anto mukono yatera igufuri iri ati nahindika no mukono mbwenu aba harweka y'umwara bahoreba aha ibati abona bo buyizire bakankereza bakantwara uwabo batumaho baramubange beja bayeta motoka nyekiro bantwara umwirwaro.
Gloria is married to a polygamous husband. After giving birth to 3 children, her husband wanted to get rid of her so that he could remain with fewer mouths to feed. When she withstood the beatings and would not abandon her 3 children, he devised a plan to physically remove her from the land.
Hati kubarebere nayanga bo bankwata bate bankiriza bagenda abantu mumotoka batemba bakinga.
She was dropped off in a village 200 kilometers away, but she came back and sought help at Yuganet and Tungamo offices. Her case went to court, but it was soon mediated and resolved. She's been given a place to raise her children, and the husband was warned to stop beating her.
yaba mbuzire icyo kurya ibyo ni byanjye tebye konka obusinge bwonyine naho bukuba ntagiterwa.
Uganet is taking the lead together with a group of NGOs, including people living with HIV, to voice concerns on the legal implications of making Uganda's first legislation on HIV/AIDS prevention and control. Although the law is intended to bind government to cater for people living with HIV by providing funds for their treatment and control activities, there are provisions in the bill, if passed in its original form, that could lead to stigma and discrimination. They would also create difficulties in implementation because fewer people would go for testing and seek treatment. Dr. Brian Asimwe is the chairperson of the Social Services Committee of Parliament, which has been mandated to scrutinize the bill before it goes for debate in Parliament.
The bill has many sections. Many sections are okay and have not been, they are not contentious among very many people or before very many people. But there are other sections, few sections, which are a bit contentious. One of them is the criminalization of intentional transmission of HIV. That is, I think, the most highly contentious. Then another one is about attempted transmission, that if you attempt to infect a person, and you should be taken to court. There we have a problem of proof, and how do we define attempting to infect a person or transmit HIV to that person. That's another area that has generated a lot of debate. Another one is disclosure. It has also generated a lot of debate.
Uganet identified these issues, which could reverse the gains Uganda has made, which brought the prevalence rates down from 15% in the early 1990s to current prevalence among adults estimated at 6.4%. They've held meetings and public dialogues to ensure that the damaging clauses are removed from the bill. Government representatives and members of parliament have come and listened, and the issues of concern are beginning to sink in.
Uganet has met us, I think, more than once, and one of the issues they raised was deleting criminalization of intentional transmission of HIV, and I think they have a point, because they think this will make people not come out. Many of them, people living with, for example, people living with HIV/AIDS have come out voluntarily, but if you're going to isolate people living with HIV, that is going to make people hide and don't come out, because they know if they come out and they are known, in case anything goes wrong, they'll be taken to court, something like that.
The struggle against HIV/AIDS continues, and the need to safeguard individual fundamental human rights remains at the center. Uganet has registered key successes, but a lot more is yet to be done. Tinka Ignatius Zarugaba is a district CID officer in Masindi. He carried out the investigations in the Nyakato case.
Uganet has had a great impact. If we take Nyakato's case, to sum up other cases, one, Nyakato was able to receive her mattress back. But not only that, when police and the Uganet went on the ground, we realized that the problem were neighbors. Nyakato being HIV infected, being a person without relatives, without a husband, without anybody. So the community around wanted to use that disadvantage on Nyakato to take everything of hers, including land. And we shared, and the Uganet took it a responsibility that the land of Nyakato should be titled.
You find many more people who realize that, who acknowledge that there's a link between HIV/AIDS and human rights. You find many HIV positive people who are able to stand up, come out and openly, bring out issues when they face discrimination at work, in health centers. You find orphans coming up despite the fact that they haven't reached age. Through our legal aid and radio programs, you find orphans, even if they don't have an adult speaking for them, at least seeking out legal aid service providers to say, I'm not going to school, my father was. But my father was working here and we need to help to follow up our property or, the death benefits.
The successes are, however, against a backdrop of an epidemic that is still spreading, leaving in its wake vulnerable people, particularly women and children. Their rights continue to be abused. On the other hand, human rights abuse also forces some people to engage in behavior that may lead to the spread of HIV/AIDS.
There is a lot that can still be done. For example, sensitization has to go ahead because sensitization touches an attitude and you cannot change an attitude within a day. So you need to continue telling the community members, no, you do not have to discriminate against people that are living with HIV. So it is a process, and in this process, they need to continue hearing these messages, respect the rights of people living with HIV, so that at the end of the day, probably the next generation shall have no discrimination on those grounds.
My appeal to the civil society, to government and other development partners, interested to make sure that we don't lose the fight, which we have started and we have invested a lot of resources in, is to continue with the same focus that we need to reduce the infection rates by making more and more people getting knowledge, making sure that we protect human rights, especially for those vulnerable groups, and that so that even UGANET is able to continue this crusade, this struggle of making sure that Uganda and maybe elsewhere can still live with this disease, but more decently, and therefore without victimizing people, but only giving them knowledge to cope with the situation, and eventually to be a keeper of one another, which will definitely lead to reduction. And we are hopeful one day this disease will be overcome.